RFK Jr. could beat President Biden in the first two contests for the 2024 Democratic presidential nomination, this according to Axios. Traditionally, Iowa and New Hampshire have been the first to vote states in Democrats' primary contest season, but last December, Biden changed it to South Carolina.
Iowa and New Hampshire Democrats didn't take kindly to the move and are threatening to throw a wrench in the works, holding their contests regardless. This would all but certainly block Biden from winning the first two contests, as the president's camp already said he won't be on the ballot in those states if they vote before South Carolina. If that's the case, RFK could end up being the beneficiary, possibly scoring some victories in the Hawkeye and Granite states. This is an interesting situation to be in. I'm in the camp of thinking that perhaps the primary process should just be held in a way where every state votes on the same day. That makes sense to me when I think about a functioning democracy. I think it gives kind of undue power to the states that go first. People like picking winners. And if the population of those states isn't really representative of the country, they might sway voters in the following states. Amber, what do you make of the mess?
Yeah, there's definitely a point to be made that the early states do determine a lot of where the momentum is. However, obviously, in the last election primary process, Biden was not doing very well until he got to South Carolina. So I don't really buy the Biden administration's reasoning for trying to change the primary calendar. They claim that they want to move South Carolina into the first position because it is more racially diverse than New Hampshire and Iowa, but it just seems a little convenient that this so happens to be the state that basically kicked off Biden's win streak and a state in which he traditionally performs very well. Now all of a sudden they want to kick Iowa and New Hampshire out when Biden didn't win those states last time.
I think that's such a good point, Amber. That was absolutely the case, that the big win in South Carolina led the Democratic Party to say, all right, everybody, we're going to drop out and endorse this guy. This is the establishment candidate that's performing the best. And so now we're in this really sticky situation. I think Iowa and New Hampshire, because it's a part of their state constitution, that they hold the first primary contest in the case of New Hampshire and caucus in the case of Iowa, they're going to really push for this. I can see a world where they absolutely hold their contests anyway. They care a lot about what this brings to their local economies. We have this kind of political industrial complex where campaigns going in and spending a bunch of money, having staff in there, there's kind of an economic boom around the caucuses in Iowa and the primaries that are first in New Hampshire. And so they depend on this. It's also a big deal culturally for the parties there. Whether it's good or bad, I think they're going to push to be held first in Iowa, New Hampshire anyway. And what does that mean for a candidate like RFK, who's polling quite well behind Biden? It might actually give him the advantage.
Well, not to mention that Biden's name might not even be on the ballot because his campaign is trying to hold firm and saying if Iowa and New Hampshire go first, we're basically not going to participate in that process. I think this has ramifications for the general election as well, because if you anger these local parties that traditionally are used to having a lot of power, if you tell them that their voice doesn't matter, that you don't care about them, the DNC is going to do what it wants, that's not a good look. I mean, if I were one of those local party officials, I would potentially be upset enough to consider pulling support from Biden if he moves along to the general election.
Yeah, I also would point to the caucuses being an absolute mess for the Democrats in 2020. In Iowa, they relied on this kind of technology that was not fully tested or fleshed out. And this was something that local Democrats, progressive Democrats in Iowa were saying, do we really want this large tech corporation to be running the caucuses on our behalf? There were all kinds of reporting problems. The caucus process is already quite chaotic, where it's, instead of people casting ballots into a machine, a bunch of people going to their respective corners of a high school gym, and they debate with each other over which candidate should be the president and convince people standing in other corners of the gym or cafeteria or church or what have you to come over to their side. It's absolute madness, and you can imagine there's a large group of people who might want to participate in the political process, but don't really want to participate in a social event or let all of their neighbors know what their political beliefs are. And so I think it's time to do away with the caucus and hold a primary that is just all states voting at once. But that's not going to change the fact that Biden hasn't campaigned like this for the presidency. We had COVID hit in 2020. We don't actually know if Biden can stand on the campaign trail against Trump and if he can run another primary again. So that's going to be interesting to see as well, and might be another advantage for the candidates running against Biden in the primary.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, Biden basically ran a campaign from his basement in 2020. He didn't do a lot of public events. He didn't really spend much time on the campaign trail at all. I did an investigation of how many hours he was actually working when he was on the campaign trail in the September leading up to the election. And he was not even pulling a 40-hour work week. So it was not good news for his ability to be able to actually perform the duties of president. We've now seen since then that he loves an early press lid. He does not do very many events in the evening. And when he does travel, he usually takes a few days to recuperate afterwards, typically at one of his homes in Delaware. So this campaign is going to be pretty tough on him, especially if he's going up against Trump or one of the younger, more spry Republicans. I mean, I remember fondly being in New Hampshire for the Democratic primary last cycle. And there's something really nostalgic and sort of romanticized about that process. And at that time in 2020, Trump actually came to disrupt the Democratic primary by holding a rally at the University of New Hampshire. And it was more well attended than any of the Democratic candidate events and was basically the talk of the town and received outsized media coverage as well. So if that's the type of strategy that he's going to be taking heading into this Democratic primary season, which is drawing all the attention away from their candidates, then Biden could be in trouble.
Yeah, I think campaigning against the Democrats in the primary is an interesting strategy from Trump. But also, I think this is going to be a campaign that's really defined by their work in the digital space and on online spaces. We haven't seen the Biden campaign do a particularly good job at that. We've seen Marianne take off on TikTok. We've seen RFK do a really good job using Twitter. And we really haven't seen the Biden camp capture an online following in the same way. As someone who's a zillennial, a lot of the Biden content is very cringe. And so the Dark Brandon stuff is funny. That stuff's good. I don't think they know how to capitalize on it. And I know that Gen Z for Change is now kind of in the establishment camp, which is really disappointing to see. A lot of those organizers that were really pushing the Biden administration left and doing a lot of effective digital organizing around student loan debt and what have you, now they've gotten invited to the White House a bunch of times and are fully in the Biden camp during a primary. This is a group of organizers that used to be very progressive. And so perhaps Gen Z for Change might be able to deliver for Biden on the digital front, but he doesn't have that kind of organic popularity that RFK and Marianne have demonstrated to have. I think what happens online matters more than ever. Grassroots organizing hasn't been the same since the pandemic, and I really don't think they're going to win on the doors. Not that Biden ever had a big ground game. I just think digital is going to matter a lot more this time around.
It almost seems inevitable that the establishment candidates don't have a good social media presence because everything is so manufactured. All of the tweets are written by somebody, in a press room who is completely divorced from the candidate and is just trying not to get in trouble. So you never really have interesting content. I think that's why Trump's social media presence is so fascinating to people, because he really is no holds barred and doesn't have that traditional press style approach to being on social media. But we'll see if RFK Jr. can maybe pull some momentum from these early primary states and give Biden a run for his money. We'll be back with more Rising after this.